Good evening to all of our guests. Thank you so much for joining us this Friday evening. There's so many other places and things you could be doing right now with your time, but you thought it was not robbery to be here with us. And for that, we sincerely thank you. My name is Hania Diaz, and I'm the current president of the Florida Atlantic University chapter of the Student National Medical Association. This evening, we have an amazing panel of experienced guests from different areas of the community joining us for this virtual town hall on diversity in higher education in 2021. It is our intent to engage in the necessary discussion on diversity, equity, and inclusion in higher education. To be mindful of everyone's time, our Director of Social Media, Hannah Levine, will serve as our timekeeper. But before we begin, please join me in welcoming our faculty advisor, Dr. Michael J.L. Smith, to introduce our panel guests.
Thank you so much for that, Hania. Just thank you all for being here this evening. Our students have worked very hard to make this happen, to have a very substantive discussion. I want to go ahead and start introducing our panel guests. We'll start with Dr. Sophia George. She is the Dean and Professor of the Christine E. Lynn College of Nursing at Florida Atlantic University. Please say hello, Dr. George.
Good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here with all of you. Since joining FAU, I've had benefited from a great collaboration with Dr. Smith and other colleagues from the College of Medicine. And of course, what nurses do and what doctors do require great close collaboration. So happy to be here.
Thank you so much, Dr. George. Mr. Darwin Allen, he is the STEM Case Manager of Education and Community Justice Department for the Urban League of Broward County. Please say hello, Mr. Allen.
Good evening, everyone. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for taking the time to join us in this discussion. And I appreciate Dr. Michael Smith for this invitation and this distinguished panel.
Thank you so much, Mr. Allen. And we have Dr. Cheryl Holder. She's a board certified in internal medicine physician and interim associate dean for diversity, equity, inclusivity, and community initiatives at Florida International University. Please say hello, Dr. Holder.
Hi, good evening. And thank you for having me to be here with this great event from SNMA. I'm also the chapter of the Florida State, the president of the Florida State Medical Association, which is the National Medical Association in Florida. And of course, SNMA, which evolved from the NMA. So it's double appreciation to be here. And I represent the sister school down in the South, Florida International, and was I think we both started about the same time. And I worked with FAU and Julie Servas in the past, so this is great. And I see Brian Blair, who was one of my mentees some years ago, actually maybe about a year ago, and he's here too. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Holder. And we have with us also Mr. David Bynes, the Assistant Director of Diversity Education and Training right here at Florida Atlantic University. Please say hello, Mr. Bynes.
Good evening, everyone. Awesome to be with you all tonight. I do serve in what we call the Center for Inclusion, Diversity, Education, and Advocacy, where I do have the primary responsibility over diversity, education, and training. 4 days, and then I'll be transitioning to a new office that we're calling the Office of Black Student Success and Initiatives. So great to be on the panel with you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bynes. And next on our panel is Dr. Mark DeCorsia. He's the Assistant Dean for Medical Education and Associate Professor of Integrated Medical Science right here at the Charles E. Schmidt College of Medicine. Please say hello, Dr. DeCorsia.
Great. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much. I really appreciate the invitation. And I think if 2020 has taught us nothing, it's to make sure that we're all muted or unmuted at the right and appropriate time on these things. And here we are about 8 months into the pandemic, and I still don't have it down. So everybody give the symbol if one of us winds up not unmuting ourselves. But thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. DeCorsia. And certainly last but not least is Dr. Lisa Martinez. a great friend of mine, but she's also the assistant professor of medicine and director of Foundations of Medicine course at the Charles E. Schmidt College of Medicine. Please say hello, Dr. Martinez.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for the invitation as well. And I look forward to hearing your questions, but also hearing the answers from these wonderful panelists.
Thank you so much, Dr. Martinez, and thank you all for joining us. We're going to just make sure that we—
Did you forget me, Dr.
Dr. Colette Brown. Dr. Graham. Brown
Oh my
Graham.
goodness! Oh my goodness! My good friend.
That's okay.
I give you permission to beat me up the next time you see me because I have your name right here in front of me. Ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to introduce Dr. Colette Brown Graham. She is indeed a board certified fellow of the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology and fellow member of the board of directors for the T. Leroy Jefferson Medical Society. Dr. Colette Brown, please say hello.
Hello, everyone, and I'm just as happy as everyone else is to be here. And thank you for this distinguished board of people. I have nowhere better to be on my Friday than here with you guys. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brown Graham. Dr. Brown and I have worked closely on a number of projects, and I absolutely could not have this discussion without her. So thank you all again. Now, our chapter treasurer, Sarvika, will introduce herself and our opening video.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you all for joining us. As everyone has said before, I am Sarvika. I am the SNMA's chapter treasurer, and we wanted to start off our panel with this opening video on why diversity matters in education.
Just coming from a diverse background, I think I hold a set of experiences that are unique, that are very much part of a larger narrative of people of color in America.
As a queer woman of color, I've never learned about anyone like me, and that from that kind of stemmed this confusion and feeling like I was really different.
For me, I grew up in the Caribbean. Being an Asian adopted kid in a black family growing up, people started to question my behavior. They were like, you don't act like an Asian kid. And I started to ask myself, what does that even mean?
Having a diverse group of peers around you is really important too, because you get the opportunity to talk about your identity and talk about the things that matter to you and your personal experiences, and get to share them with people who may have different, experiences than you do.
I think just learning from people about their customs and their religions and their ideas helps you kind of learn about yourself and learn about what's important to you and what's not important to you.
Getting exposed to ideas that you're not usually exposed to helps you develop more of a compassion towards your fellow humans. You can start interacting like humans again.
I've learned more from the people I've met from the various backgrounds and cultures that they have grown up in, more so than just the regular stuff that comes out of your textbook.
You learn probably just as much from your peers and from the people that you're surrounded by that you do from your professors within the class.
I bring a lot of perspectives to the table. I'm Afghan, I'm queer, I'm a woman. I've learned a lot about interesting women in history, women of color, queer people, figures that have actually paved the way in a lot of ways that you wouldn't have learned at more conservative schools.
I wouldn't have such a holistic understanding if I didn't have people around me who do come from a different set of backgrounds or unique sets of backgrounds.
It needs to happen. It's incredibly, incredibly important.
If we don't try to learn or we're not integrated into a diverse environment, into a diverse education, then we probably won't be able to survive, as much in this world or in any society.
All right. Thank you so much, Sarvika, for that amazing video. It really does capture what our conversation is going to be about today, and it paints a picture of why this conversation is so important. So without further ado, we will get started with our first question. And our first question is going to be, and this is for everyone, so feel free to jump in and we'll go from there. So again, our first question is going to be, what specific actions are being taken or have been taken already or should be taken in the future to address the issues of diversity in higher education, rather than just hearing about amorphous ideas?
Yeah, briefly, I'd just say that as a dean of a College of Nursing and a part of a university like Florida Atlantic University, of course, you know, we can all do better. We do pride ourselves at FAU of being one of the most diverse universities in terms of student diversity. However, we do recognize that our diversity of faculty is not where it should be, right? And so part of the things that we're doing is, of course, trying to include or increase our diversity of faculty, including at the College of Nursing as well as other places. Also, of course, because we have a diverse student body, making sure that we give voice to our diverse body of students for what it is that they need. And even me, being fairly new to FAU, you know, hearing some difficult conversations that students have raised in how their needs are not being met or how they're not feeling included, although we as a college pride ourselves in being a very caring and inclusive environment. But without those things being raised, would not have known. So, right, we're making adjustments here and there and doing the best we can. Since my joining FAU, I started something as simple as inclusivity, diversity, and equity task force, so that we can see where we are as a college in terms of how diverse we think we are, and then identify what the gaps are. And then so that we can also be a medium or a source where students, faculty, and staff can bring those concerns, rather than those concerns only being brought to sort of individual faculty or myself only as dean. Although, of course, I myself am from an underrepresented group, I only represent one group. And so I am not fully aware of all the other represented groups, so I can't speak on behalf of all of them. So really also, as we redesigned our strategic plan, because it also has to be part of an organization's strategic plan, to embrace inclusive excellence, as I call it, across the curriculum, as well as in research, as well as in the way that we interact with each other. And so this task force is just one step. And we're trying to make it a standing task force. We've gotten great involvement. And of course, we've partnered with others across campus to see what they're doing. We think the College of Medicine is doing a great job in terms of what Dr. Smith and his colleagues do in their office, and getting best practices from other institutions, including the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, which is one of my favorites, just because it does a great job at addressing health disparities in particular. Because as we look at higher education, right, many institutions include colleges of nursing, medicine, social work that do address health disparities. And one of the things that we can do to help address that is to help build a more diverse workforce that reflects the patient population that we treat. So that's one part of it. And I mean, I can go on, but I want to also hear from our other colleagues. So I'll just pause my comments there.
Dr. George outlined pretty much the basic structure that we deal with. But I think if you're saying education, there's so many levels. So if you look at from the beginning, elementary education all the way through, what we're doing or what we need to do is look at the funding structure, which is based on a structurally biased system that then pretty much guarantees who's going to come up the ladder to be able to achieve college education, professional schools. So if we're looking at education, we're going to have to go way back and say, what are we as a community and a society going to do to fund education properly and accept that our current structure of property taxes basically disinvest a whole group of people. And right, based on our many structures for hundreds of years, that often leads to Black and brown people and then the racism that involves. So when you already start off at that area, so that's one area. By the time you get to the higher ed, we have some very good diversity policies that are in place. And I think what's been happening now is the definition of diversity and how expansive we're going to do that, because that could include anyone. But if we're looking at achieving the gaps in ethnic representation that reflects our society, we're going to have to come to terms with how accountable are we holding our universities. And that's happening now in many places. And I have to thank this generation for bringing it out and forcing the universities to have real diversity offices, creating real plans. Right now at our school, every department must have a diversity plan and must have some way of saying, we're going to get the hiring done. We're going to get the students in. We're going to look at the barriers that's affecting the students that we really want in. So it cuts across, but it's going to be our society challenging our current status and then holding us accountable to achieving it. But in the past, there's been millions of dollars spent and we've never achieved our goals in medicine. So it does require different changes. And there are a lot of different ideas that we can go on through that's going throughout the country to try and prove this.
Well stated, Ms. Holder. I just wanted to add to what you're saying. Coming from the Urban League of Broward County as a STEM education, our specific thing that we have seen is actually targeting students in the 8th grade into STEM careers, identifying real stakeholders in STEM career fields, specifically in this regard to this conversation, those individuals in, for example, the medicine track being veterinary medicine. So we intentionally brought in a African-American woman to speak and present her duties and responsibilities that she performs every day. Because again, a veterinarian is a doctor. She has gone to medical school. She then shared her track from Florida A&M to Tuskegee University, which is the only accredited veterinary medical school. And she's speaking to a diverse group of Black and Brown students, whether they speak Spanish, Portuguese, or French, or Patois as their primary tongue. But now they are inspired to see that there's an opportunity because she shares with them that her unique placement in the market field as a veterinarian, there are very few that look just like her. Now they are inspired to be able to say, hey, it's possible, because she just shared with me that if I don't go to FAMU and I go to FAU for animal science, and then I do matriculate onto a veterinary school, and I am a person who speaks Portuguese and a first graduate, generational graduate from college, I can now increase the economics in my community and make an impact on someone else who does look like me. So that's what I've seen, how someone can be specific and be intentional, and then it's a direct link. But we have to, of course, make sure we are having partnerships all on the way. And I'd be remiss to say that Dr. Smith was also instrumental with our program in doing that very thing.
I was just going to add, I agree completely with what Dr. George, Dr. Holder, and Mr. Allen had mentioned. I think having plans, strategic plans, words, and diversifying what people see as what that community is made up of is obviously going to be really important. But specific actions that I think can be made, and I am not a dean, nor am I like the head of admissions. I was a program director, so I did do some recruitment. But I think in academia, we have been stuck in this setting of objective information. And the reality is that objective information has not, in fact, been objective. We have placed value in things that were subjective to the person that started them. And so when we look at our history, why is the MCAT so important? Why, for instance, there's Tulane is going through some issues right now. Why were HBCUs ranked so far below some of the Ivy League colleges? Why? There are objective things that each university can really offer, but because of the people that are giving weight to these objective findings, we're missing out on a whole community of individuals that can not only diversify, but improve medicine or whatever the field is. So I think we need to understand our history. I think that's a good action. And I believe that we need to look at the way that we recruit and the way that we admit people into our colleges, and how we can make sure that we're getting the skills that will really benefit our patients and our communities as a whole. And I don't know the right answer to that. I'm still learning, but I do feel that it needs to be broken down and rebuilt with the idea that it's not just one particular person that makes a good doctor. We all bring something different to the table.
Yeah, thank you so much. I know that we all have a lot to say, but nevertheless, we have many questions that we want to get through. So I'm sorry for interrupting. Again, thank you so much, Dr. Martinez, and everyone else who made the great comments. And Dr. Martinez, you brought a great point, which is going to serve as a great transition point for our next question, which is just as important. So our next question is going to be, at this point, what is the biggest barrier your institution is currently facing in promoting a more diverse environment? And what are the ways the students can help, again, remove those barriers, which we just talked about?
I think for Florida Atlantic University, one of the biggest barriers, and Dr. George spoke to, would be that our faculty, even though our student body is 50% minority, if you will, or Black and Brown students, our faculty is still 77% white. In addition to that, we only have, I think, 20, maybe between 20 and 25 full-time professors of color. And so one of our greatest barriers is getting students to really buy into the idea that we truly are one of the most diverse institutions in the country. By way of what I do, I get a chance to touch students, faculty, and staff through my trainings. Matter of fact, today I just did a training with the entire division of undergraduate studies. And so, you know, some of the things that while we're doing the trainings, I think that we have to, you know, look at the rhetoric that we're putting out and make sure that, as Dr. Martinez spoke to, that we're really ready to go back and identify with this idea or principle of abolition. I think one of the great things that this generation has done is brought us to that point of understanding it's time to eliminate old policies and practices and really recreate or create new ones that really are about inclusivity. And that's one of the hardest things to do, because that means that institutions have to look at the infrastructure and really now be ready to grapple with the hard recourse, if you will, of tearing down the old and building something for the future.
In medical education, the issue again for us is also with faculty and with Black males and Black women. If you're going to break it down, diversity, the definition is so wide that every school has a diverse campus diversity, because it can be whatever it is, because we're all unique. So there's a lot of diversity. So we are going to have to take the difficult step of saying, yes, we're diverse, but then what is missing and how is that going to improve the learning environment? And at FIU, what's missing for us is often Black people in across the board, whether it's faculty, staff, and students. We don't have as many. So what's driving this? So you brought up MCATs, and that's, we've had holistic review in the AAMC for about 10, 20 years. We've had this training ad nauseum, yet it hasn't changed. So it does come down to being intentional and changing how we see MCATs, and knowing that a 500 MCAT, the kids do just as well as a 515. So why do we go towards the 515 and not truly find the other factors that make the student be successful? And why would they drop out when they get into medical school? So there's so many things that have to be changed, but it does come with intentional leadership to say, use the evidence and move forward. Now that's our challenge, and that's what we're going to have to do. I just read the New York Times today, an incredible article on a group called the National Equity Lab. They went throughout the country, 300 kids in the poorest schools in America who were talented children. They put them in Harvard courses, top courses. Almost 90% of the kids passed and did well in these courses. Had these kids gone through the traditional testing system, they may never have been accepted into a Harvard course. Yet that study showed that these kids can do just as well. So it's not that the kids aren't out there. It's that our current structure blocks them and we don't identify the talent and bring them in. So that was one study, and that's what we're going to have to do across the board, is eliminate some of our standard things that are based on structure to move it ahead.
I want to say one thing because I think it's so critical that we haven't really addressed this. I graduated from medical school in 1988, and we had the same percentage of minority women that we have today. Now, if you look at that, and everyone then was saying, oh my goodness, I can't believe it. We had 3 Black women in my class at University of Miami School of Medicine. And I don't know that that number is that different today there. So my point is that we have to actually come up with some concrete things that we can actually move forward with. So I'm really glad that we're having this discussion, because it's really important that we go from, this is 30 something years later, and we're still at the same 2% of Black women are doctors. I mean, we have to do something different. So if that, I'm shaking my head at that too, because that's really abysmal if you think about it. So I appreciate this. I do agree with you, Dr. Holder, but I really wish we would start even earlier. I think that the whole idea that we take a bunch of students and we say, okay, you're gonna go to a better school because your parents have more money, so we're gonna put more money into your school. We need to actually break that open and fix it. We cannot have schools, you know, some schools be really, really well endowed and some schools have no money, because I go to a lot of schools and talk to the kids. And I will tell you that the schools that have a lot of parent-teacher involvement and have more money going to their school because they live in a better real estate area, those schools perform tremendously better than Glade Central or any of the other schools that don't traditionally live in an area. So that to me is one of the major things that we need to break apart. I mean, we've been saying it for years, but some sort of way we have to invest in schools for traditionally poor people, or what we consider poor people. Poor brown people maybe, but we need to do better where that is concerned, I think.
Once again, I'm going to jump in here and I agree with you that you gave some very valid points. And for me, in my perspective, as you can see behind me, I am a product of the United States Air Force. I do not have a regional mindset. I have a global mindset. I've lived overseas. I've lived on both coasts. And with that concept, I look at what is diversity. Diversity is not just male, female, not just the percentage of numbers that pass a test. It is the diversity of the power and the decision making. If the diversity of the power and decision making does not change, then the individuals that you want to assist must utilize what power they do have. So therefore, the barrier is the diversity of the power. Right now, our educational system has been impacted by a global pandemic. Therefore, you have individuals that are in a learning environment that the inequities are very, very on the front page. You know, if you were doing poorly before, it's an in-person learner, and now you have to rely on the ability to have discipline, to get on your computer, to have connectivity, and then be able to read, decode, and research, then you need scaffolding and support. You need a Verizon. You need internet capabilities that's going to allow you to understand that platform. Then you're going to need to be able to have someone that can help walk you through what it really means to take a AP course, an IB course, or just do the very, very best GPA 4.0 in the basic, algebra, geometry, calculus, and therefore you will then be able to obtain a scholarship full ride, because the zip code now has been blurred. You can actually receive location education wherever you desire. Individuals have been doing it for years. They've been doing the opportunity of, hey, I want to be a tennis player, I want to be a soccer player. So therefore they get their remote education, or they have a tutor. Now everyone has access to it technically, but you still need to have a mentor. And that brings me back to the idea of you need to have intentional mentors every step of the way, who are willing to say, it's not about the money, it's about the change and making the improvement. That's my thought.
Thank you so much, Mr. Allen. Thank you for that. So some panelists have mentioned that the schools they're representing have implemented changes that are going to allow for a more diverse student and faculty body. With that in mind, at what point should an organization consider itself to have achieved the goal of diversity? And at the same time, what is your perspective? What is your goal of diversity? What do you envision when you think of this?
So I'll say we'll never achieve it. Not that we'll never achieve it, but that it will be a constant evolution as the world changes, as diversity changes, as our landscape changes. So I don't really see it as something that we should be thinking about that we're going to achieve it, grab it, close down all the diversity, equity, inclusion departments because they're no longer needed. It's, if anything, they're going to just be expanded and they are going to be further diversified. Because, I think for those of us that have been around for a long time, and I think probably even one of the issues I know that in my own growth during this whole entire experience, and I would say that the groundwater presentation in some ways helped me very much with this, is having the blinders removed of thinking we've come further than we have, because certainly the world is different than the one I was born into. And so one could certainly think and be deluded into imagining we have arrived. And it only became very, very clear, to realize that, yes, okay, we've made some gains. But then it wound up taking the next generation to kind of come back up to us and pretty much shake their head and be like, yeah, no, you didn't. I will tell all of the people in the audience, the young people in the audience, be prepared 30 years from now, because the next group of young people are going to come back to you and are also going to say the same thing. And you're going to look at them and say, what? We're the BLM people. We are the woke generation. And I'm just telling you, they're going to shake their head and be like, yeah, no. So I think it is a constant process to which we will always be pushing and always be trying to advocate for movement forward. And we should never rest on laurels. And we really have to just make sure that what we're really trying to address and go after, I think, is what many of my esteemed colleagues on the panel have been talking about, is the changes in the infrastructure, the changes in the leadership, the change in the people that are making the levels of decisions, because that really is what shakes up the process. It can be a groundswelling from the ground up, and I think that creates a level of discomfort and introspection and makes people have to do it. But ultimately, it is within the power structure to be able to want to change those things, to change the way that things are moving forward. And I can't help but want to go back to one of the comments that Dr. Holder made that I was kind of so happy that she did make, was that when I got the questions that you all wrote, which I thought were wonderful and very, very thought-provoking, I highlighted so many times the word that just diversity is used. And I just wish we would stop using the politically correct grand term. Listen, the issue that we are sitting on in the United States of America is an issue with African Americans in medicine, African Americans in society. I'm not saying other people don't suffer as a member of the LGBTQ community. I'm telling you, we all have our pains. But I think when we're looking about making systematic changes within education, within medicine, then it is really going to have to be focusing far more energy on African Americans and stop using the word diversity, even stop using the word people of color, because I question, who does that mean? Does it mean Southeast Asians? Because, they're overrepresented in medicine, but I would imagine they consider themselves people of color and have every right to. And so I want us to call it what it is. I want us to name it. I want us to stop pretending, because I think that helps create the illusion and stops people from facing what we need to face. And if there was one thing I wish that our College of Medicine did not embrace, because I think it gets at the infrastructure question, was that when we decided to embrace US News and World Report and we decided to try to be ranked as a medical school, that placed that emphasis on that MCAT score and the excellence funds by which that the state rewards us and gives us, let's face it, we're the poor kids on the block, at a state school. We're all recycling paper clips. We're, the ones that are not flush like Yale and the Harvards of the world with lots of endowments and lots of funds. And so when they roll crumbs of money at you and they dangle the carrot in front of you of what you have to do, it often reinforces the infrastructure and the process that says, don't look at the diversity, don't look at the things that can make people wonderful doctors and bring things to medicine, because you have to meet these levels of metrics. And it's not that African Americans don't meet those levels of metrics. The problem is we're all scrapping and fighting over them. And so we need to just broaden it out a lot more and just allow more people to kind of come into the fold. And that comes with changes in leaderships and changes with focus.
So one of the things that I think that you're saying is that you're saying that we need to increase the pipeline. Because if we have a bigger pipeline, then it will be more people there so that we will have an opportunity for more students to get educated and for more people. So that is critical, I think, for us to increase the pipeline. And some sort of way, the pipeline has got to get bigger so that we have more people, so that we can actually not fight over the same 4 people. Okay.
But there are a lot in the pipeline. We don't accept the ones. Many of our schools will not accept the MCAT scores at 500s. I see it all the time. So we're all fighting over the high scores, the metrics, and they're not going to come to FAU and FIU, which is what I say. Not that we're not fabulous schools, but let's face it, if I'm getting a full scholarship to Harvard with my high score, I'm going there. So this is our problem.
And you'd be crazy not to.
Yeah, why define? And so we won't accept that the metrics do not create the doctor. And we can make incredible doctors if we use the real data and find the talented students that may not show. So we do need to learn how to find those talented students and not depend on a structural criteria that is structurally racist. So that's where we are educators in medicine.
If you don't mind,
Thank you.
if you don't mind, can I jump right back in on that? Because again, you brought up a very valid point. Increase the pipeline. It's very interesting to me that Black and brown are a smaller percentage of the pipeline, right? When it gets to the higher ed, but that same group is in the Army, in the Navy, in the Marine Corps, and are doing very well. And the thing they do differently is that they pay them to learn and they train at the same time. So is there a way, when the question was asked, if you want to educate differently, reduce the barrier where you're providing a 8th grader the opportunity to learn and develop and grow. And when they do complete that task, now at the high school level, they're going to be even more intentional to select your program because of the fact that you've already identified them to want to do that, and then allow them to have a real direct pipeline to a pharmacy program, such as maybe CVS, or a real program with regards to a research lab that's checking on, sickle cell. Okay. Now their intentionality for paying attention in biology, for math, everything else, you've just increased the opportunity. But again, you have to understand, are you going to be intentional to increase the pipeline? Because that's really what STEM's all about.
And I think that, and I speak diversity, equity, inclusion across the board, right? I'm not in the Met field, but I think it applies. And that is, we know what to do. Now it's about having the courage to do it, right? The other piece and the hard piece of this conversation is intentionality, that we now have to look at the historical literacy and understand that the systems that are in place are very intentional and have historically been very intentional. And we have to be honest about that. So I love Dr. Brown's comment about we have the same 2%. Well, the reality is that in most cases, I won't say all, but in most cases, it's very intentional that we have the same 2%. It's very intentional that we're all fighting over the same 5 students, right? because the intentionality of the caste system, right, that was put in place in the late 1600s was very specific about what it was supposed to do. This idea of using diversity, we use the term diversity very intentionally, right, to keep the nuances there and that we understand what diversity really means. And anytime we try to move away from diversity to start really talking about equity and justice, which is really where the conversation should be, now all of a sudden the game changes, right? And so this idea now, we should be talking about equity because equity asks the question, who is this for, right? Why do we continue to hold on to MCAT scores? Because we know that holding on to MCAT scores is going to mean a certain type of student is going to make it and a certain type of student is not going to make it. That's equity, right? And so if we want to have justice, we're going to say, let's remove those barriers because we know at the end of the day, these other students that aren't cutting it because they're not making the metrics, they can still do the work. The metrics doesn't mean that they can't. The metrics is simply a barrier so that we can keep our certain standards and percentages and numbers intact so that ultimately this caste system can remain intact, right? This idea of dominant and subordinate, and one group is going to be in that dominant power role, another group is going to serve that, and until we get real with that, right? And these decision makers, FAU, our entire board is, I would say, 98% white men of all making these decisions. When we talk about what we call our president's executive level, right? All white men and white women. And so realistically from that space, right, they can only operate from their lens, their racial lens. So we have to move towards this historical literacy and also this idea of racial literacy. We've got to increase racial literacy and understanding what it really means, because I love Dr. DeCourcy's comment. This really is about racial justice, right? And how it is that we're going to reckon with that and then recreate, or no, not recreate, tear down systems and build new systems that really are inclusive.
Professor Smith, can people hear me?
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to take a point of privilege and welcome to the discussion a very dear friend of mine. He's past president of the T. Leroy Jefferson Medical Society and new president of the Palm Beach Medical Society. I'd like to introduce to you all Dr. Roger Duncan. Dr. Duncan, please say hello and share your thoughts.
Yeah, sorry, just jumped out of the operating room and all that, but great to be here with all of you guys, and really excited by the level of discussion and awareness, and everybody on the call definitely seems woke, which is fantastic. And one thing I wanted to say that's equally as important, we definitely have to use these times of increased sensitivity to encourage all the organizations to be desirous of, increased amounts of inclusion and understanding, the 1619 curriculum and all this sort of stuff. So hopefully they drink all of that in so they're more sensitive. And we all understand that fact that, say, for instance, African Americans are 13% of the U.S. population, but only 4% of the doctors. And then looking for that unicorn of the black male who's trying to matriculate, has really become quite a challenge. But one thing I think is very important, and we want to sensitize all of those people, but we got to fortify our kids into increasing that very viable pipeline of academically successful kids who from an early age have to really get into those tough classes, not just basket weaving and football and the liberal arts. They got to go after those meaty subjects that are going to have them be successful with the upper level undergrad stuff like all your SNMA people have had to do, like I had to do, and then the medical school, etc. They and one thing that's in my heart for the last 30 years, trying to encourage all the kids, tell them how fun math and science was, research is cool, being a book nerd is cool, and that, you know, delayed gratification can definitely pay dividends. And so that's why, you know, I've done a lot of different programs, but one I'm most proud of is the Health Fair or Health and Science Career Symposium. And last year, 1 year ago exactly today, we had Dr. David Satcher, the former U.S. Surgeon General. He ran CDC and Health and Human Services. And we had over 1,000 students who were hearing about not only being a boring doctor, dentist, or pharmacist, but what about being an epidemiologist, a hospital administrator, anesthesia assistant. You know, with or without a stethoscope, you can be involved in healthcare. And but the track to get into all those careers, I think there's always going to be criterion and curricula and degrees that you have to have. So fortifying our kids and letting them know that they're just as smart as everybody else and they can be successful in those things is going to make them viable candidates that can't be weeded out as readily. So I'm very happy and pleased to be, you know, within this discussion, and I look forward to hearing what other big-minded people on the call have to say about how we can push the ball forward.
Thank you so much, Dr. Duncan. Thank you for all of that. And I love how positive we all are throughout this conversation, but I believe that we cannot turn a blind eye to our current reality in the United States. And our next question is going to be a loaded one. So here we go. Our next question is, can Black and brown folks truly feel like they are Americans is in the country in the wake of the recent years of Black killings such as George Floyd, Elijah McClain, Breonna Taylor, Jacob Blake, among others, and an institution full of a racist police institution and institutional tolerance of white supremacy groups. And if you don't believe that these folks could truly feel Americans, what can we do to change that?
So I don't mean to go first, but I'm going to say, I'm the grandchildren of immigrants. And so what I find so interesting is this concept of, who gets to feel like an American, because I really believe that the African American community has far more rights towards claiming their Americanism and their place in this country than necessarily I do, having only been here for 2 generations in the country. Yet in 2 generations, my grandparents who came over with nothing more than 6th and 8th grade educations now have 2 grandchildren with PhDs in just 2 generations, which I cannot deny is because of the fact that I'm Caucasian and because I am male. And so it is very much, I understand the idea of feeling disenfranchised and being exposed to what's going on in the world right now. As much as, I couldn't be more of a leftist. And I think in many ways we are probably, as the expression says, preaching to the choir. I would imagine we are all harmonizing in the choir together. As much as I loathe the former president and everybody that worked for him, and I hope there's a special place for them in the afterlife, is that I am grateful for the fact that they exposed in an terribly gross way what is truly the underbelly of the system. Because had it not been for that presidency and for that administration, especially coming out of the fabulous Obama years, I think we could have remained deluded. And I think, to be honest with you, we would never, even though, I mean, the African American community knows about the police system and everything like that, but it would have just been so easy to continue the same tropes and to swallow the Kool-Aid and just assume that everything is okay. And, you know, one of the things that came up on social media that I liked when people were questioning, you know, why do so many people like the Trump presidency? I mean, he's done nothing positive for them. He's done nothing. And the comment that was made is because he hates the same people that they do. And he has given them a voice and has allowed them to, you know, storm the castle, literally and figuratively, with their flags of the army that we beat, you know, 100 and some odd years ago, you know what I mean? To say, you know, to where we wanted to always think it was a few fringe, crazy Southerners, you know, who just hold on. And all of a sudden it became like 53% of the country. And so in some ways, until you can expose things and rip the Band-Aid off of them and see things clearly to remove the deniability, you cannot move forward. And so, you know, I don't really have the answer to your question other than to say, I hope people will hang with us and will now, you know, in some ways, the thing that I would assume happened from childhood with, you know, Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and with Shirley Chisholm and all of the early leaders, we're now ready for the next second wave or third wave or fifth wave or 10th wave. Remember, this is a never ending story, right? To now move it forward. And really, I think what it's going to take is for all of us, especially those of us with privilege, to take a more active role, to where I hope that many of you that are listening that are going to be doctors will realize that, yes, you also need to be elected to government, whether it's local government, whether it's state government, whether it's federal government. We not only need to vote, we need to be vocal. We need to put our money where our mouths are. So we must take the privilege we have been given and we must use it to make the level of change that we can. Even if that change is not going to be paradigmatic, that is a dream, it is moving steps forward. So that's my moment.
I want to tell you that you have just preached. I mean, that was amazing. And so much of what you say, I truly believe. I actually came to this country at the age of 13. So I don't even have ownership to this. I'm American, but no one is going to tell me where I can go or where I can't go. So I do feel that I am bold and privileged enough to know that I am going where I want to go for sure. But I really hope that we can encourage many people to more than vote. I want them to go out there and become the leaders that we need, because it's not good enough to maybe have $2 and think you have something. You have to go out there and be a change maker. Because if you're a change maker, if they can't, I joke with my husband and say, I said to him, you know, well, Trump can't put all of us back because there's too many of us that have a say. So the truth is that I do think it's important that we do more than just, okay, I got my little doctor and I'm a doctor, and so I have my little money here and I can go where I want. You've got to make roads for other people to go. You have to be the change that you were talking about, because if you're not that change, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that you can buy the house that you want in the area that you want. You have to help someone. You have to pull them up with you. I'm not trying to preach. I'm just telling the truth. You have to pull someone else up with you, or you haven't done everything you can do.
I'm optimistic it's going to change fully, and how safe you are in belonging, because math rules. The demographics of the US rules what's going to happen in the next 20 to 50 years. And so it is on the millennial, they're the majority population now. And the millennials are the most ethnically diverse, racially diverse group in America at this point. So the baby boomers and the others are getting older. And so the math rules. So in terms of numbers, the opportunity is there for the young people to make America what you feel it should be, to put in the policies, to vote, to make the jobs, because math rules. So I am very optimistic, and based on what I'm seeing so far, I think we can make this work. But like everyone else said, you got to do the work, but the numbers are there for you.
And I think that it has to be done now, because the numbers are there on both sides. And what I mean by that is the projection is by 2053, yes, Black and brown people will be dominant in percentage-wise, right? But that same year is also, they're saying that the average wealth will be zero. And 10 years after that, the wealth will be zero for brown people. So we've got to see that, right, and begin to look further ahead than what we are right now and begin to do the work right now. The other piece I would say is that, as in my doctoral studies, one of the things I look at is K through 12, and I look at this idea of reimagining school. And so I would say I love everything that's being said. And from the medical field, I think that one of the things that has to happen is getting in front of our children even earlier, right, than middle school. Because one of the things that's happening is that we know that disproportionately Black and brown children are being not just suspended, but expelled. And that's not even happening at middle school and high school. That's happening starting at pre-K. Did you hear what I said? Pre-K. So we know pre-K through third grade, our Black and brown children are being expelled disproportionately. Not only are they being expelled, but they're also being, they're also coming into experiences, where they're being put in handcuffs. And so this idea of what one scholar, Bettina Love, would call the spirit murder, right? And so the spirit and the ethos of our children are being murdered to the point that by the time they get to, 5th grade and 8th grade, those markers, that they've already kind of checked out. And so this idea of empowering them to go into the medical field, law field, those fields that require a more rigorous course of study, we have to begin to get in front of them a lot sooner and in spaces other than school. So we do a lot of talk about this idea of counter-hegemonic spaces, right? These learning spaces. So bringing back the days of the community learning schools, right? Just getting together and beginning to talk through a book, right? And doing all these kinds of things, but creating our own learning spaces, because we know that is not traditionally happening in schools.
Absolutely. You almost took the words right out of my mouth, because again, if you reimagine school, what have we said to reimagine school? School is to provide someone the skill sets and the encouragement and the mentoring and the scaffolding to be the better citizen, regardless of where you come from. So therefore, if you are Baker acting, as you alluded to, a child in high school, you're Baker acting a child in middle school, you are now disenfranchising a whole community from a possible mental health real issues that could be going on with that social isolation that's going on. And now you've exacerbated another area. But to your point, can Black and brown students truly feel like American in this country? These have been here since what? The inception. There's always been some type of distraction, and I call them distractions. When you're in basic training, the first thing they teach you is, can you do your job when the bombs are going off? And then if you become a Marine, you are able to run towards the problem, run into the area, and make the change. So reimagining school is, are we actually doing community schools like you alluded to, but these called learning hubs. So you have a STEM learning hub for biomedical engineering at the younger age, and you're tracking them all the way through and helping them and scaffolding them all the way through to that career. You have another learning hub where they're actually identified and they want to be a drone pilot, and they take those drone pilot skills and become a real estate agent and able to make a difference in their community and make a difference in their household by the time they reach high school. All these skill sets we've kind of gotten away from. It almost sounds like a HBCU in its origin. If you're teaching individuals where they are, a skill, a trade, they will naturally want to write better, naturally want to read more, naturally want to actually do those things that are going to benefit them for a STEM career. We've been distracted with, and forgive me for saying this to some, but we've been distracted with the glitz and glamour of an athletic career, the expediency of maybe being a performer, the expediency of being able to stand on the particular area and pontificate and then not be able to have a real skill set that is marketable. Being able just to network with somebody, having a real conversation is a skill set, because not everybody is amenable and willing to talk to people. So you must be congenial. I mean, you can be smart as all get out, but if you cannot have a conversation and be congenial and constantly argumentative and be definitely focused, no one wants to be bothered with you. So yes, can we do it? Can they do it? Is this their country? Yes. And they can proudly serve, and get paid to do so if they also join one of the branches. But we don't have to have them in the military. We can actually do these reimagined schools and learning hubs and get them into the University of Samsung, the University of whomever.
I'm going to bring up our last question. Again, last but not least. And as we might all know, education is important, and it is important for us to educate everyone. Thus, the implementation of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs are important, but at the same time, we should be implementing or creating relationships between students and people who are diverse, for a lack of a better word. And what I would like to know, what is your organization doing to implement these relationships between the student and someone who is coming from a diverse background? At the same time, with that in mind, to collaborate with the community to build a path for a better future for those people.
We alluded to earlier the importance of having diverse faculty be available to teach our students. We recognize that at FAU in particular, we're still working on that, right? We still have a lot of work to do. In our own college, at the School of Nursing, we do have, members of the diverse faculty, and we do have adjunct faculty that help us fill that gap. So if it were not for our adjunct faculty, we would be much lower on our number of faculty from underrepresented groups. And so our adjunct faculty do help to fill that gap, so that our 50% body of students who are from underrepresented groups do have faculty that they can look up to, who can mentor them. Luckily for me, I do have an associate dean of academic programs who's amazing, who happens to be an African-American woman. And we do have a number of faculty who are African-American, Asian, few Latinos. And so our students do have faculty that they can bounce ideas off of, have transparent conversations with, because we recognize that students from underrepresented groups may not share their true concerns if their faculty don't look like them, right? Same thing that we see with patients. Patients will not be as honest with a healthcare provider that does not look like them for fear of judgment or whatever. And so that's one piece of the puzzle that we as an institution at FAU and the College of Nursing in particular are trying to really work on, and increasing our diversity. And I think me being the first African-American dean that our college has had, and our college has been in existence for 40 years. So across 40 years, this is the first time they've had a dean of color. And so, that's one piece of progress. Of course, I can't do it by myself, but I can recognize, the gaps that we have and try to do the best that I can to help fill those gaps for our students, which then will help fill those gaps for the patients that we aim to serve.
At FIU, we're doing similar issues. What you've heard, though, with all the mentoring and the ideas, they're all wonderful. However, the numbers currently means that faculty that look like me end up doing 2 to 3 jobs. And so we often call it the tax, and none of this is ever reimbursed or even reflected in your promotion and in your anything, because so we're hoping that their time comes where the current leadership, and that's what we say, that students have to hold it accountable, that these training programs are in place. We have so much technology now. We have ways to put money and bring in the best people to train everyone. And so that the existing teams can have support in doing the work, because you're not going to get anywhere. Even there are only 50-something thousand doctors, Black physicians in this country. So I don't care how many mentoring programs you have, there are just not that many of us. And there are times like FAU, I know two cycles you had no Black students in your classes. That should be unacceptable, but not for Black people saying it's unacceptable. It should be the white people and the Hispanics and the Indians and everyone saying that's unacceptable because our learning experience is being harmed. So that's where we have to go as a society to say that there are certain things that are unacceptable to white people, Hispanic, to everyone when you don't see everyone in your group. I tell everyone it's like coronavirus. We're running around and all the rich folks are getting the vaccines. Coronavirus does not discriminate. So as it mutates, because it's easily transmitted to everyone else, all the rich folks who got those vaccines, it may not mean anything because you have a variant. So when we talk about equity, this is what we have to deal with. But it means right now, intentionally, the dollars have to flow. There are enough programs that we've had experiences with that you can now fund and improve the current school system. I sit on admissions and I see a lot of kids who are Black males, 500, who did not get accepted. So I know there are people right here, right now, that they could accept in these medical school classes that would be as fantastic a physician as the kids who we chose with the other numbers. So the pipeline should be primed to have even more kids, but we should now, existing kids, say, let's take the chance. Not even a chance, let's take it, but then recognize what we have to do with our curriculum. So their curriculum changes to adopt the kids who may not have the social capital to excel in the first class of medical school, because that takes some other skill sets that we don't change in our curriculum. So we have everything right here, right now. What we don't have is the political will. And we don't have our society saying that changing the system benefits all of us. Not just benefits Black people, not just benefits brown people, but it benefits all of us. Racism costs over $16 trillion to the US economy, and that's been studied. It hurts all of us. So when we say these changes, we're talking about improving health for all Americans. So that's where I see the issue, is the political will to make the changes now and change who we have in. So we don't really, if we don't have 20 doctors to go meet all the kids in the school, we have doctors who go out to those schools and say, we want you because we value you, no matter what that doctor currently looks like now, because there are only 50-something thousand Black doctors out here, and we all can't do the 100 million American kids that we need to get the message across. So I know we have the resources. It's the intention and the understanding that it's not about just those people, but it's about all of us as Americans benefiting by this change.
So Dr. Holder, I want to, oh, I'm sorry, Dr. Brown.
No, I think the key statement though, I actually want to reiterate this, because the key statement is racism hurts everyone. If we could really just put that out there and remember, it doesn't matter if I'm brown or I'm white or I'm Black or I'm pink, racism hurts everyone. And diversity improves health for everyone and education for everyone. So if we actually just, if we get nothing else from this, because I didn't say it, Dr. Holder did, but I'm telling you, that's been my prime thought through a lot of my life. Racism hurts everyone. There's so much data that actually supports that racism is not something that anyone should accept. We should all be like, that's not right. It doesn't improve our health, because it will. And even when we don't give the vaccine to brown people first, who are actually being disproportionately affected, it's going to come back around and bite everyone. So it is really incredible that we don't see the importance of squelching racism right down to its root.
Yeah, as you said, coronavirus doesn't discriminate, but our system does. So it's it's terrible. But I actually wanted to just echo what Dr. Holder said. You know, I'm a first generation Hispanic American, but I'm a tall white woman. And no doubt that I have succeeded in some things, probably somewhat because of the color of my skin, which is unfair on so many levels. And what I see is that my Black colleagues do take like the brunt of carrying this weight of, you know, years and years of racism. And I can just stroll into any place and everybody just assumes I'm a white American, right? So I think what I need to do, right, as on the white side, is we need to speak up. You know, a lot of times we see groups of, you know, Black and brown faculty getting together, but we, you know, the allies really need to say something. And it takes that courage that Mr. Bynes had mentioned earlier. We have to go beyond just accepting what has always been because we've benefited from it. Because the entire country and our local communities are going to benefit from giving everybody the equity that they deserve. But it's going to take a lot of work because the amount of racism that is actually out there is not going to change with one person speaking up, two people speaking up. We need to have a bigger movement, and that's what I hope to continue to work on with, you know, my colleagues and everybody else that I work with, is to elevate that and to make sure that the next generation of medical students, of lawyers, of whatever anybody wants to be, they have that equity. Because it's really more than diversity and numbers that, you know, we've mentioned a few times, right? It's really about people getting that chance, and that chance gets squandered away sometime at like 2 minutes of birth. And so we need to change that. So thank you for inviting me, because that's all I have to add.
And Dr. Martinez, we have to change the rhetoric, right? In terms of it's more than, we are beyond allies at this point, right? And so in my trainings, I tell people we're so far beyond allies. And don't misconstrue me. I willingly accept them, but if an ally for a person means they're going to sit on the sideline, we're beyond that. And so now we have to begin to move into this idea of at least being an accomplice, right? So that means that you're willing to put skin in the game, be in it with us, right? Another scholar would say that it moves even beyond the accomplice and becoming a co-conspirator, right? That simply means that you're going to get in it. So for instance, I think it was Bree Williams, right? When she climbed the Capitol, I think in South Carolina, there are white folks who went with her, right? They planned it out, went with her. When the police came, she climbed the Capitol, took down the Confederate flag. When the police came, they put their body in between her and the police. That's called being a co-conspirator. What we need of white folks today, and I held a program over the summer called What Must White People Do Now, right? This idea of what white people need to do now is to be co-conspirators. It's time out for white people to keep saying, I want to do it, but I don't know where to start. Well, you've got to be willing to do the work, and you can't continue to rely on Black and brown people to educate you when there's plenty of knowledge out there and plenty of ways to get that knowledge. We simply need for white folks to make the decision that I'm going to come off the sidelines, at least be at the starting point of being an accomplice, if not being and doing the work to be an accomplice, which means I utilize my privilege, right? And because I understand that with privilege comes power, you can't separate the two. And so now I'm going to use that to step in on behalf of those people who are part of, quote unquote, those traditionally marginalized groups.
Thank you so
agree
much,
more.
Mr. Bynes. Oh,
Yeah,
sorry,
I just
Dr.
want to say
DeCourcy.
just one thing. I just want to say it's so true, and it's funny. I shared this with Dr. Smith. You know, I think part of, in order to step up and in order to be that co-conspirator, again, you have to wipe the blindness from your eyes, because, you know, one of the things that the students had brought up to us, and I shared this with Dr. Smith, was that the lack of diversity, especially of African Americans in terms of award winners, and especially for things like our Gold Humanism Society, which only admits a very small number of people in that period of time. And I always go to the receptions. I always go, and everything like this. And I've had African American students that were in my PBL groups and things like that. But what's funny is when you're used to being in the majority, is that when I would see the students all standing in a line, yes, I may see a diversity of color because there are Southeast Asians, there are other people that are not, let's say, completely Caucasian. It's not like a white washed thing, but it never dawned on me. Like I'm telling you, the question never entered my mind. Why are there no African American students standing in that line? And so I think in order to become a co-conspirator, we first have to be willing to question in every place that we go, to kind of what Dr. George is saying also, is like when we walk into a leadership area, why am I looking at one African American face? Why are there no African American faces? And so once you kind of reach that level of the blindness being wiped away, then you can become a co-conspirator, because now you are actually seeing it and you're not just kind of walking blindly through life. And instead you just see these things that happen on television or things and you think, oh, gee, it's terrible. You know what I mean? Like, that's not right. And, you don't really see where can you use your privilege because you're not even recognizing it in your own backyard. So it's like, I don't have to go out into the street and I don't have to go to another state or another town or another area. I literally only have to walk out that door to my office and see it. You know what I mean? And then all of a sudden, then I can realize where the co-conspirator comes into it. And I think the other part of the question that was asked, and I think that this is an issue also in academia, and it was something that we also built into our strategic plan, was that in order for us to engage our communities with whom the university sits in and with whom that we serve, we have often gone in, regardless of our color, but because of our degrees and because of our status, we have gone into those communities telling them what their problems and what their issues are and what we can bring and what we can do for them. We have yet to go in and to ask them, what are your issues? What would you like our help with? What would you like us to empower you to be able to, instead of us having to come, what would you like us to build in for you to give you the power and the resources, really thinking about Foucault's work and what the critical scholars talk about, and stop really saying it is not us coming down. It is really empowering the people there to be able to be have control and agency over their own destinies. And that's where I feel in some ways that we have still failed to partner with the communities by which that we serve, is to really get down in there and from them to tell us, here's where we need you and here's what you can do for us, and to meet that.
Thank you so much, Dr. DeCorsia. And I just want to take the time to thank all of the professionals who took the time to have such a sensitive but just as important of a conversation. And I want to thank the older generation, and I'm sorry for calling you all old, but for providing us with a different perspective and into this conversation. And I know that all of our student body really appreciate that. And with that in mind, I'm gonna please Hania come in to give our closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Delina. Before Hania comes in, I just want us, if we could all just unmute for a second and just give our panel a round of applause. Thank you so much. Thank you all so much. And as a point of privilege, I just want to thank all my friends on this panel. And, I regard you as a friend. I invited panel guests because I hold them in a particular regard. I've only been in Palm Beach County for a few years, and I've been very blessed and fortunate to have met some wonderful people, to have networked with some folks, and that led to some other folks, and I'm thankful for that. And this is the culmination. This is the product of that great networking from other friends And it's the blessing of having people who are like-minded, who are willing to put some skin in the game. And I thank you for that. I sincerely do. Recognizing Dr. Holder, Dr. Colette Brown Graham, Mr. Allen, Darwin Allen, Mr. David Bynes, Dr. Roger Duncan, Dr. Martin DeCourcia, and Dr. Lisa Martinez, and my great friend over in nursing, Dr. Sophia George. Thank you all. And I would be remiss if I did not give special recognition to an amazing planning committee of young ladies who just responded. They put all this together in 2 weeks, just 2 weeks. And so, I am, I really can't express, I have the father's pride, but I want to recognize Hannah Levine, Sarvika Bamakanti, Katrina Ramzamouche, Delina Lafita, and Hanya Diaz. I know I probably butchered some of your names, but God, you know I love you to death. But I want to thank this amazing group of students. I want to recognize all of our other members of SNMA who are out there. I want to recognize the students in MAPS, Minority Association of Pre-Medical Students, AMWA, the American Medical Women's Association. I want to thank the students in the new BSN, Black Students in Nursing, and everyone else who took time to join us for this amazing conversation. This is what we mean by we want to have a real discussion, none of that placid, just dance around the truth. And thank you all for being so honest. So right now I'll shut up and hand it over to our president, Hanya Diaz.